Okay. First things first today for your first homework. This is going to be the first one that we do, so let's see if we have any questions after, just let me know. You can text me on Remind 101. So, first things first, today for our homework, we're just going to do a lot of review. Most of these things you should know. We're going to talk about integers, we're going to talk about fractions, and we're going to talk about coefficients. So first things first, let's talk about integers. So what is an integer? Okay, well, integers are both positive and negative numbers, right? They're whole numbers. So let's think about it. Positive 1 is an integer. Negative 2 is an integer. Negative 6,000 is an integer. Okay? So integers are both positive and negative numbers. Okay, so now that we remember what integers are, let's just go over some really simple integer multiplication rules. Now, multiplication. Anytime you multiply anything, the result is what? The result is a product. So, a product equals the result of multiplication. Okay? So it doesn't matter if I multiply 1,000 times a million, the result is the product. It doesn't matter if I multiply 1 times 1. The result is the product because I multiplied. So let's talk about using integers when we multiply. Now if I multiply a positive number by a positive number, I get a positive product. So if I have positive 5 and I multiply it by positive 1, I get positive 5, right? So the rule is positive number times a positive number equals a positive number, right? So positive number 1 times positive number 2 is a positive product. Now, what about if I have two negative numbers? So if I have a negative 5 and I multiply it by negative 1, do I have a negative number as my result, or do I have a positive number as my result? I have a positive number. My negatives cancel each other out. So the rule is negative number times a negative number equals a positive number. Okay? So negative number 1 times negative number 2 is a positive product. All right, now let's talk about if I have a positive and a negative. Now I have negative 5 and I multiply it by 1. Do we think we're going to have a positive or a negative number? This should just be review at this point, but we should all know that a negative times a positive is a negative number, okay? So rule, negative number times a positive number equals a negative number, okay? Seems clear. I think we all probably have that, right? So let's go ahead and review fractions. Now let's talk about fractions. Now, if we're going to talk about fractions, I know everybody thinks fractions are a little scary because they have this weird bar in them, yada, yada, yada. Nobody likes to use them. We all love whole numbers. Great, but from now on, we're using fractions all the time. Okay, so let's talk about fractions. Now, like integers, fractions are what? We call them rational numbers. So let's talk about rational numbers really quickly. Rational numbers are pretty much all the numbers you know, okay? All the numbers that you know are rational numbers. Think about positive numbers, think about negative numbers, think about whole numbers, think about decimals, think about fractions, think about large numbers, think about small numbers, okay? All of those numbers are rational numbers. 1/2 is a rational number. 0.5 is a rational number. 1 is a rational number. -1 is a rational number. 1,000 is a rational number. 1,000,000 is a rational number. Okay? Got it? Great. So, since they include everything, they include fractions. We went over that. Now, I just want to do a quick review on fractions, but the division of fractions. Now, when we used fractions to divide, so let's say we refer to the example that is on your sheet, 1/2 divided by 1/2. Now, if I want to divide these, I have to use the multiplicative inverse. I know, it's a big, long, fancy word, sounds complicated, blah, blah, blah. Great, so we have the multiplicative inverse. Now, we can also call this our reciprocal. That just means the number that we're gonna flip over, all right? Think about it, flip-flop. Now, I have 1/2, and I'm dividing it by 1/2. So my reciprocal is going to be the number I'm dividing by. So my second number, what I'm dividing by. 1/2 divided by 1/2. Now I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to flip this one. So I'm going to make it 2/1. Now, instead of dividing, because I flipped my number, I'm going to multiply. I know, seems strange, but again, this should be a review because when we divide fractions, we what? Multiply by the reciprocal. Okay, now, if I multiply by the reciprocal, how do I make this look? I make it look like 1 times 2 over 2 times 1. That's what multiplying looks like for fractions, okay? So what is 1 times 2? We all know what 1 times 2 is. It's 2, right? What is 2 times 1? The same thing. 2, right? Now, can I simplify this? Of course I can. 2 and 2 are the same, right? 2 divides into 2, because that's what fractions are. Bottom number divided into the top number. Simplifies to 1, because anything divided by itself is 1, right? So the answer of 1/2 divided by 1/2 equals 1, okay? So our step 1 was to set up the fractions side by side. We did that. Then we went ahead and we flipped over the second number. 1/2 times 2/1. We went ahead and we multiplied. 1 times 2, 2 times 1. We got 2/2. That equals 1. Now, we can do this with all sorts of numbers. Let's go ahead and give it another quick look. Just follow along. So let's say I have 2/7 divided by 1/3. Now I set them up side by side. What's my next step? I flip my second number. So 2/7, and then I have 3/1. Now, do I multiply or do I divide? We know, multiply, right? That also looks like 2 times 3/7 times 1. What's 2 times 3? 6. What's 7/1? 7. Our answer would be 6/7. Okay? Everybody got that? Now, what's the next thing we want to talk about? We're finally getting here. Finally getting to what the big stuff is. Kind of newer, less new than this, a little bit newer, maybe less fresh in your mind. We're going to talk about coefficients. Now, coefficients are very important because you're going to be using them a lot this semester. Okay? Because from this point on, we're pretty much going to be talking about equations, folks. Now, coefficient is the number used to multiply a variable, okay? It is found in front of a variable, okay? So a variable is a symbol used to represent an unknown number. Now, you all know what one of these looks like. Say I have 16D. 16 my coefficient. D, that's my variable, right? Okay, now, quickly go through, review, circle your coefficient and underline your variable in that tiny little box that's below, okay? Give you a few minutes, or you can pause this video. Now, that you've had some time and you went ahead and you circled your coefficient and you underline your variable, let's go ahead and let's just do a little one-step equation with each other. It's got a coefficient in it, it's got a variable, it's going to use some fractions that we talked about, okay? So let's not be scared. I have 1/2 D equals 12, okay? Now on your worksheet that you're following along with, fill in any answers for because you want full credit for your homework, right? It has a step 1. Now, step 1 usually is always just rewrite your equation. Just go ahead and get that down in your mind. Rewrite your equation. We know this is an equation, right? Because there's a what? Pretty little equal sign. There's something on each side of it, right? Now our goal is always to balance the equation. We're always trying to make things equal. We like to live a nice, balanced life, right? So, step 1. When we look at this problem, we're going to use some order of operations. What do we have next to D? We have 1/2, right? Now, the whole goal of this game is to get D by itself so that we know what D equals, right? So if I have 1/2 D, I'm going to divide 1/2 on each side. Now, how do I divide a fraction? I multiply by the reciprocal, right? That means that I need to multiply this by the reciprocal. So, I'm going to multiply what? What's the reciprocal of 1/2? 2/1. Okay, now whatever I do to one side of my equation, I have to do it to the other side of my equation. Balancing things, right? Think about balance. So whatever happens to one, we do to the other, okay? Until we get D by itself. So I'm going to multiply 12 by 2/1. Now, let's go ahead and totally work this problem out. Now, these two numbers also mean 2 times 1 over 1 times 2. Now, we did this earlier. What does that mean? That cancels itself out, right? Cancels itself out. Leaves D all by its lonesome. So we have D all by itself, but what about over here? We've got all this hoopla. Now, we always know that any number 5 is actually 5/1. 1 is actually 1/1. 7 is actually 7/1. Okay? So I take 12/1 and I multiply it by 2/1. Now, that just means 12 times 2 over 1 times 1. Now, that means that D equals 12 times 2 is what? 24. 1 times 1 is what? 1. Now we just said that means that any number on this side, we just looked at this example, any number is that number over 1, right? So what is this? We can simplify this to simple. It's 24. So D equals 24. Now, when we're talking about coefficients, something you want to remember. If you just have D, there's always an invisible 1 in front of it, okay? If you just have D, you just have 1D. If I have 2, I have 2D, right? But if there's no number in front of it, it's an invisible 1. It's just 1D on its own equals 24, okay? Now, I always, I can't stress this enough, want to check our work. So after I go through my first step and I multiply both sides by 2/1, and then I see that the left side cancels out and D is left by itself, I go ahead and I multiply 12 times 2 and 1 by 1, and then I divide 24 by 1, and I know that D equals 24. I'm going to check my work. So I'm going to plug in 24 for D. So I have 1/2 times 24 equals 12. Now, 24, that means this, right? So that means over 1, multiply. 1 times 24 is 24. 2 times 1 is 2. Does that equal 12? It does. 2 into 24 equals 12. 12 equals 12. It's the same number on both sides of my equal sign? Absolutely it is. Does that mean my equation is balanced? Absolutely it does. Doesn't mean that one side is heavier or lighter than the other. 12 equals 12. All right, so that's pretty much what we're going to be talking about in class tomorrow. We're going to talk about coefficients. We're going to solve some one-step equations. Now, here are some other things that you might want to jot down, but I promise we'll go over in class. Do not forget that when you are solving an equation, single, two-step, multivariable, multi-step, oh, I know all these things sound crazy, you are going to use inverse operations. Inverse, we know, means the opposite, right? So we're going to go over this after we solve some of it tomorrow. We're going to talk about this later. But for now, that's your homework.